Hello again, APUS government. We are here today to finish up the legislative branch content. Just want to make sure that you all are ready for your test, which is on Thursday. So if you're hearing this and seeing this on Wednesday, February 17th, it means that your test is tomorrow. That's Thursday, February 18th. Remember, you're going to have a multiple choice test and a free response question in the argumentative style. So there's just a couple of things for legislative branch that I want to finish up right now. While at this moment, when you're listening to me, I am probably trying to recover from the COVID vaccine. So hopefully I'm feeling okay, but I wanted to make this in preparation. So let's talk about members of Congress getting elected. Then we're going to talk about issues getting to Congress, how a bill becomes a law, and a few last miscellaneous things that Mr. Holland thinks are important. So let's talk about congressional elections. If you are an incumbent, the incumbent is the person who already holds the office. If you are an incumbent and you are running for re-election, you are very likely to win in Congress. The incumbency advantage in Congress is not as strong as it used to be, but it's still pretty strong. Incumbents usually win in both the House of Representatives and in the Senate. This is kind of a weird thing with American voters. American voters in general don't like Congress overall. Congress's approval rating as a whole is very, very low, but incumbents get reelected like more than 80% of the time. It's a very strange thing where most voters hate Congress in general, but when they think about their representative and their senator, they think, no, actually, I like my representative. I like my senators. It's everyone else that's the problem. So incumbents tend to do really well, and we're going to talk about why. One of the most important incumbency advantages is name recognition. You just know the person who is your senator and you know your representative, and you think, well, they must not be doing that bad a job. I know them, they've had the job for a while, and the devil you know is better than the devil you don't. Maybe you elect this new person, you take a chance on them, and they're crazy. So that is a huge part to incumbency advantage is just people know their name. You've gotten used to seeing billboards and posters and yard signs with this person's name. That's one of the hardest things to being a challenger is just even getting people to know who you are. And incumbents step into the race already with that name recognition. There's a specific term called franking for incumbents, people who are in Congress. This is only members of Congress. They get to send mail home to their constituents for free from their office as a way of updating them. They're not allowed to use it for campaign related materials, but it can be a way of just sending out information and updates. Hey, look at what I'm accomplishing in Congress. That's called franking. And it's just one more way that incumbents get to get in touch with their constituents. Members of Congress have a full time staff. So these are people who can do what's called constituent services. If you have a problem, if you have an issue in your district, as a voter, you can call up your member of Congress, talk to someone on their staff, and get help from them. Um, Constituents and voters can also call members of Congress with issues. They can call them telling them how they want them to vote. I do that a lot. The people on staff in these congressional offices probably get tired of hearing from me, but they're always very kind, very polite, and they write down my issue. Occasionally, I get some sort of response, some sort of email or message back, and most likely those concerns get handled by the staff. And if you're a challenger, you may have a campaign staff, but you don't have a full time staff to help you with some of the workload the way an incumbent does. We've talked about gerrymandering before. If you're in the House, because gerrymandering only applies to the House, if you are in the House of Representatives and your district has been gerrymandered by your political party, then it's going to be very, very hard for the other party to unseat you. Remember, we looked at the map of North Carolina and we saw how gerrymandered it was, where um, in those three districts that Democrats do have, it's going to be really tough for Republicans to beat those incumbents. In the Republican held seats, the other seats, it's going to be really hard for Democrats to win. The challenge with gerrymandering, and what we're seeing more and more, is that if you are in a gerrymandered district, you won't lose to the other party, but you might lose to a more extreme member of your own party. If you're a Republican, your risk is from a more conservative Republican. If you're a Democrat, your risk is from a more liberal Democrat. So gerrymandering may have played a role in Congress becoming more polarized, Republicans moving more to the right, Democrats moving more to the left. We'll talk more in the future about PACs, this word, PAC, Political Action Committee. These are outside groups, interest groups that raise money and donate them to candidates. And 80% of PAC money gets donated to incumbents. Incumbents tend to win more, so PACs want to back a winner. So they donate to incumbents. Then, when incumbents win, these interest groups expect that they will be able to get access to the legislator, that they'll be able to arrange a meeting with their lobbyists. So, political action committees raise money, donate them to candidates, and expect favorable legislation when the time comes. We talked about pork before. If you're an incumbent and um, you can get money spent, federal money spent in your district for special projects. That's going to bring federal money. That's going to create jobs. That's going to provide infrastructure in your district or in your state. That can be a huge help to you. These terms are described in the reading, but just wanted to highlight them for you. A marginal seat is one that is very close. Our seat, Virginia's 2nd congressional district, is a marginal seat, won by less than 5%. Ours was quite close in the past 2 elections. Um, so it is considered a marginal seat. Sometimes you'll hear this called swing seats or swing districts, ones where both the Republican and the Democrat have a shot. An open seat is one where there is no incumbent. And then a safe seat is a seat that is won by 5% of the vote or more. This is a tough seat to flip. So, safe seat is one where the incumbent is going to be a challenge to get rid of. If you vote as a delegate, meaning you do what your constituents want, they're more likely to reward you with reelection. If there's less voter turnout, that tends to be a good sign for incumbents. Higher voter turnout tends to mean energy on behalf of a challenger. If you're if you have seniority, meaning if you've been in Congress for a while or you have some kind of leadership position, that can be helpful. Sometimes a challenger is able to paint you as you're too much of a Washington insider. You don't care about the people back home. But typically, having a leadership role or having been in Congress for a while just tends to cement that incumbency advantage. And the last thing is what's called a sophomore surge. If you're running for reelection for the first time, you tend to get a little bit of a boost. That happened with our member of Congress, Elaine Luria. She won reelection, her first reelection in 2020. She got a little bit of a boost and was able to hold off a challenge. So these are things that help incumbents. There's a much smaller list of things that can help challengers, some disadvantages to being an incumbent. If people are looking back, that's retrospective voting. Remember, if people are looking back and they're saying, well, you did a bad job, you didn't fulfill your promises, you didn't do what you were supposed to do, that can certainly work against you. If you're a member of Congress, you have a voting record, and that record can certainly be used against you. We talked about the other threat of gerrymandering. Maybe you lose to someone of the same party who's a little bit more extreme. If you've been involved in a scandal, that's going to hurt you. Um, the uh, the guy who used to hold Virginia's 2nd congressional seat um, had a scandal in his 2018 campaign, and it haunted him in 2018, and then again when he ran in 2020 as well. So those scandals, if they stick, they can really sink your campaign. And if you voted as a trustee, if you said, look, I'm going to follow my conscience, whether or not my constituents care. We talked about the 7 Republicans who voted for former President Trump's impeachment conviction recently. Some of them have been censured by their state parties, meaning their state party has formally voted to disagree with the action that they took to vote for conviction. Um, Kind of means that the state party is sort of taking a stand against a sitting senator of their own party, um, which could set up some interesting dynamics within the party. So if you're voting on your conscience, you might be at risk from your own constituents turning against you. All right, most of these are pretty straightforward how issues get to Congress, the different ways they get to Congress. If you are in Congress, chances are good you made some campaign promises along the way. You're going to want to fulfill those promises to make sure that you can go to your constituents and say, look what I did for you. Your party has its own agenda. In 2008, when Barack Obama was elected, he came in um, wanting to get health care done. And so other Democratic members of Congress who were elected with him might have had their own campaigns that they were trying to fulfill, but the party was moving towards healthcare. When President Trump was elected, um, he was elected on an immigration related platform. So, again, other Republicans had other concerns, but the party was moving toward immigration. When President Biden took office, he had COVID relief as his number one thing that he wanted to address. And doesn't matter what else the party wants to do, um, what the individual members promised to do as a party, they're moving in that direction toward COVID relief. Outside groups and interest groups are going to bring up legislation. They're going to bring up issues, right? The NRA is going to go to members of Congress and say, these are the things that are on our mind. The AARP, which is the interest group for retired people, is going to have their concerns. They're going to bring them to members of Congress that they have lobbied. The media, certainly, as stories break in the media, they might get picked up by members of Congress as issues. The president kind of ties in with what I talked about before. Presidents bring their own issues that they want to address. Typically, the president is seen as the leader of their party. So they're going to pull the party in the direction in which they want to go. And at the bottom here, I've got constituents. Maybe you have an issue that you're concerned about. You can certainly bring it up to your member of Congress, your senator, your representative, and try to push them to take it up. All right, let's talk about how a bill becomes a law. I'm not going to sing the Schoolhouse Rock song for you, but I am going to use this diagram that I have added a little bit to, and hopefully that will help clarify any questions that you have. So, a bill, when it is proposed, it has to be proposed by a member of Congress. Any bill can be proposed in either chamber of Congress except taxation and revenue bills have to start in the House, but any other bill can start in either of these chambers. So this particular example is going to start in the Senate. It gets proposed by a member of Congress. It gets assigned to the most relevant committee. They're going to discuss it. Remember, most of the changes to the bill, the markup gets done here. A lot of lobbying is going to get done here. Most bills never make it out of this stage. Most bills will die here in committee. So, if this bill gets voted out, a majority vote, if it gets voted out of committee, then it's going to go to the full Senate for debate. Remember, we talked about debate in the Senate, that it is untimed and that um, debate doesn't have to be relevant. You can take the floor of the Senate and talk about whatever you want. So the rules for debate in the Senate are much more relaxed. However, before the full Senate can take a vote, you have to have this step in this gray box. You have to take a cloture vote. So any vote in the Senate is a two-step process. The first vote is a motion of cloture, and it requires 60 votes in favor of the bill, just in favor of ending debate. You're not even voting for the bill. You're just voting for debate on the bill to end. If you are denied those 60 votes, that is considered a filibuster. In the old days, you used to have to stand on the floor and talk forever. We don't do that anymore. We just deny the end of debate, and The vote itself can never actually happen because debate never ends. If you can get 60 votes for cloture, then you can take that second follow up vote, which is just a majority vote. It is a full House, a full Senate vote. Now, the bill passes the Senate. It's got to start the process over in the House, meaning it has to be assigned to the relevant House committee. Changes are probably going to be made there. Then it's going to make it out of House committee. It's going to be voted on by that committee, and it can go to the whole House. I could have added an extra box here and said House Rules Committee. The House Rules Committee gets to determine how debate is going to happen in the House. For every single bill, the Rules Committee gets to determine what kinds of amendments can be added and how long they're going to debate. Then the whole House debates the bill. The whole House votes on it. Now, likely what happened is that the Senate passed one version and the House passed another. If we have two different versions of the same bill, then we have one more step. You have to go to conference committee. Um, you're going to take members of the House and you're going to take members of the Senate, and they're going to work together to come up with a compromise version of the bill, which then has to go back for full votes from both houses. So even after the conference committee is done, you still have to go back and get it passed by the whole House of Representatives and the whole Senate. You have to take majority votes in both of those houses on the conference committee bill. Only then can it go to the president's desk to be signed, hopefully. Or if it's vetoed, you can override a president's veto with a 2/3 vote. So I actually like this image a lot, this little diagram, especially with the additions that I've made of cloture and conference committee. I think it helps keep things pretty clear. I added a little term down here called log rolling. Log rolling is basically vote trading. Just saying, like, I'll support your bill if you'll support mine. It's a way of moving things along. Couple of limits on Congress's power, not specific to checks and balances, but just structural limits, things that make it tough for Congress to get anything done. There are 535 people in Congress. Compare that to one president. Having all those voices makes it really tough to pick out the leaders in Congress, right? We know who technically the leaders are, but they can't always keep their parties in line. And so you've got lots of different voices, sort of all with their own cross purposes, with their own pressures from their districts and their states, and that can make it quite challenging. Gridlock just means that it's hard to get anything done, especially if there is divided government. If one of the two houses of Congress is in control of one party and everything else is in control of the other party, it's going to be tough to make anything happen. Republicans had total control of the House, the Senate, the presidency from after the 2016 election until the 2018 midterms. Democrats retook the House after the 2018 midterms, and very few laws got passed since because the Democratic House and the Republican Senate couldn't agree on anything. Um, they got COVID relief done, and that was pretty much it. They kept the lights on, and that was about all. So if you've got divided government, that can make it difficult to accomplish anything. Even now, with 50 Democratic senators, some are very liberal, others are quite conservative, and that can make it tough to accomplish anything, even for a party that controls all the levers of government. Federalism means that states have power. The 10th Amendment reserves power to the states. And so federal government can't solve every problem. It needs states in order to function, it needs cooperation from them. And sometimes states are unwilling to cooperate. California was the bane of the Trump administration's existence. They sued the Trump administration multiple times because California is quite liberal and the Trump administration was quite conservative. The opposite we're seeing unfold now. The Biden administration did an executive order pausing deportations for 100 days, and Texas already took them to court over it. So, governors of the other party or attorneys general of the other party in the various states, if they don't get along with the president, then they can make your life very difficult, especially in court. The separation of powers, of course, Congress was designed to be the most powerful branch, but it's not all powerful. Even if Democrats can put together an agenda that can pass both houses of Congress and get signed by President Biden, it's still going to be a struggle to make sure that the Supreme Court doesn't strike things down as unconstitutional. So we've got these three distinct branches that not only are they distinct, but they can limit each other's power. And that's what we mean by checks and balances. Last thing, a few other items, terms that I think are important. Majority minority districts. These are House districts where a majority of the voters in the district or a majority of the population is made up of a racial or ethnic minority. And the Supreme Court has said that this is an acceptable way to combat past injustice, to protect the voting power of racial groups. So, majority minority districts are a constitutional way to protect the voting power of racial groups. There's a couple independents in Congress. Um, you don't have to be a member of a political party to be in Congress, although certainly most of them are. Bernie Sanders, for a long time, was not technically a Democrat because he thought the Democrats were a little too conservative. And so he was an independent. I believe he technically joined the Democratic Party when he ran for president. But he was an independent for a long time. And I could be wrong about that. He might still be technically an independent. And Angus King, senator from Maine, is also technically an independent. Both of them are liberal enough that they always vote with the Democrats. They're usually just lumped in and counted as Democrats, but are technically independents. There's a strange type of veto called a pocket veto that is written into the Constitution. It almost never happens in real life, but if Congress passes a bill and they submit it to the president and the president does nothing with it, after 10 days, the bill becomes law. That's the normal rules. The only exception to that rule is if Congress passes a bill and then adjourns, meaning they all go home. Then, after 10 days, if the president has done nothing with it, it is considered pocket vetoed, meaning he didn't have to veto it, he didn't have to sign it, it just goes away. It is pocket vetoed. Again, that almost never happens. Congress coordinates its schedule with the president to make sure that this situation doesn't happen. But that is in the Constitution, a pocket veto. Congress passes a bill and then adjourns. If the president does nothing, then after 10 days, the bill is vetoed. Remember the three different ways that you can vote. If you vote as a trustee, you vote your conscience. The people trust you to do the right thing. If you vote as a delegate, you do what the people sent you there to do. You always do the people's will. And if you vote as a politico, you mix those two things together. Typically, you probably vote as a trustee until something becomes controversial, and then you become a delegate. Nancy Pelosi, the current Speaker of the House, is also the first woman to hold that position. So just something to make note of there. And one more thing, I didn't put it on the slide, but I am going to mention it because it's probably going to come up in some of our discussions around Congress and some of our current events discussions. There is a process in Congress called budget reconciliation. Budget reconciliation. Basically, this process means in the Senate, if you are passing a bill that has to do with the budget specifically, meaning has to do with raising and spending money, then you can um, get around the filibuster. You only need a majority vote if you're using the budget reconciliation process. There's lots of rules to the budget reconciliation process. You're only allowed to do it once per year, and it has to do with the budget. So, you know, Democrats are trying to get creative with the COVID relief bill if they're going to use budget reconciliation to do it. They had wanted to include a minimum wage increase in that. Not sure that that's going to fly with the rules of budget reconciliation, but some of them are saying, look, if you raise minimum wage, people pay more in taxes, and that adds to the budget. So that counts for budget reconciliation. Not sure that'll fly, but that is one way in the Senate that you can try to get around the filibuster. You can use the budget reconciliation process to just get a majority vote. I'm not sure that'll ever show up on an AP exam, but it's something to be aware of as you're paying attention to the news. So if you've got questions, definitely send them to me by Schoology. I should be around. There is also a couple things on Schoology for you to be aware of. First, don't forget to finish and turn in your reading notes for tomorrow. Your chapter 4 reading notes are due tomorrow. So there's a place for you to turn those in. There's also the practice FRQ outline that walks you through how to write an argumentative FRQ, gives you an opportunity to practice on a sample prompt. And just make sure that you are ready for the test and FRQ tomorrow. If you've got any questions, please reach out by Schoology. Hopefully, I'm at least feeling well enough that I can respond to your messages. All right, I will see you tomorrow, and we will plan to test on the legislative branch.